He was the restless boy from Tupelo whose voice seemed to carry the heat of the Mississippi sun, a sound so electrifying that it could shake the spirit right out of a person. By his early 20s, Elvis Presley had stormed the airwaves, flipping the script on what was deemed acceptable in American music. Women screamed, preachers fumed, and the press labeled him a menace. But he became the king almost overnight, an icon whose fame reached around the globe. What the cameras didn't catch, though, was the high price of that glory. A tug of war between the desire for creative freedom and the forces that profited from his image, a consuming loneliness in the eye of a cultural hurricane, and a desperate search for the love he always feared he'd lose. Elvis was born on January 8, 1935, to Vernon and Gladys Presley. They were poor. So poor that the doctor who delivered him sometimes accepted farm produce in lieu of cash. But there was an even heavier weight on the family's shoulders. Elvis had been born a twin, and his brother, Jesse Garin, tragically arrived stillborn. From that day on, Gladys clung to her surviving son with every fiber of her being, pouring into him the kind of overprotective devotion that can heal or harm, depending on your perspective. Elvis later said, "My mother, she never let me out of her sight. The closeness bound them tightly, but also set the stage for a fear of abandonment that would echo through his adult life." His earliest memories were hymns in church and the crackle of gospel quartets on a cheap radio. That might have sounded like an unremarkable life, a child surrounded by cotton fields and small town chatter, except for the lightning bolt in his throat. As a teen, he'd strum a borrowed guitar and belt out tunes in a voice unlike anything Tupelo folks had heard. He was shy, though, and scrawny, and classmates sometimes teased him for his eccentric fashion sense and soulful singing style. Even then, music felt like his only escape route, the one thing that gave him confidence when everything else made him shrink back. At 13, his family moved to Memphis, searching for better job prospects. High school found him lingering around Beale Street, absorbing blues, R&B, and country. He once confided to a neighbor that he felt torn between all these genres, unsure if he really fit anywhere. But at 19, he landed inside Sun's studio, face to face with producer Sam Phillips. Legend has it that Elvis insisted, "I don't sound like nobody." That raw energy in the studio soared through an impromptu rendition of "That's All Right," and a local DJ played it on the radio. Listeners went wild. Suddenly, the shy kid with the slick-back hair was a Memphis sensation. This might look like an overnight success, but it sprang from a young man who felt deeply that music was his one shot to matter. As his popularity soared, bigger opportunities came knocking. RCA bought his contract from Sun for $35,000, a hefty sum in 1955. Colonel Tom Parker stepped in as his manager, a carnival-bred promoter who spotted a gold mine in Elvis's unique style. The Colonel's tactics were relentless. He booked the Ed Sullivan Show appearances, orchestrated new record deals, and hammered out Hollywood film offers. Parker's shrewdness elevated Elvis to unprecedented stardom, but it also raised an unspoken question: whose vision would shape Elvis's future? Time and again, Elvis found his own artistic impulses curbed by the Colonel's emphasis on profit. When Elvis hinted at recording a gospel album or shifting his style, Parker would urge him to stick with what sold best. One friend from that era remarked, "Elvis wanted to push boundaries, but the Colonel wanted to push sales charts." Meanwhile, Gladys worried that fame would cost her boy his soul. She sensed the frenzy of fans, the leering camera crews, and the demands from every angle. Part of her even wanted him to come home to Memphis and leave the craziness behind. The strain on the family reached a breaking point in 1958 when Elvis was drafted into the U.S. Army. He was stationed in Germany, feeling uprooted and anxious over leaving his mother. Sure enough, Gladys fell ill during his deployment, her health spiraling downward. Elvis managed an emergency leave, but she died just before he could make it back to her bedside. The devastation was so profound that for days he refused to speak to anyone, merely pacing and whispering, "She was all that I had." From that loss, he emerged different. Still charismatic on stage, but haunted by a void that no amount of applause seemed to fill. After his army stint, Elvis returned to a drastically altered musical landscape. Rock and roll had exploded, but new faces like Buddy Holly and Chuck Berry were changing the game. Colonel Parker pivoted him toward a series of lighthearted Hollywood movies that raked in the cash but left him artistically restless. Films like Blue Hawaii and Viva Las Vegas were fun, sure, and fans flocked to see him sing on the silver screen, but Elvis felt boxed in. At times, he joked with co-stars about the formulaic scripts, mumbling, "We do the same thing every time." Yet, each contract was more lucrative than the last, and Parker convinced him that that was all that mattered. By the mid-60s, however, public taste was shifting again, and Elvis's movie musical formula started to feel stale. The British invasion made him seem almost old-fashioned, a relic of the past. People whispered that maybe the king had lost his crown. During this lull, he confided to an old Memphis friend that he felt like a has-been, and I ain't even 30 yet. This sense of irrelevance didn't just bruise his ego. It chipped away at his sense of identity. He was so used to riding the wave of superstardom that the prospect of being overshadowed terrified him. In 1967, he married Priscilla Beaulieu, whom he'd met while stationed in Germany. Their wedding photos looked like a dream come true. The king and his radiant bride, draped in luxury and followed by a throng of admirers. But behind the scenes, the emotional baggage piled up. Elvis's schedule was relentless, their privacy almost non-existent, and rumors of his flirtations dogged the relationship. They had a daughter, Lisa Marie, in 1968, but the strain kept building. Priscilla sometimes confided to friends that she felt like Elvis loved the idea of a family more than the reality of it. She couldn't compete with the whirlwind of admirers or the insular entourage that followed his every move. Then came the famous '68 comeback special, a televised concert that reignited Elvis's passion for performing. He ditched the squeaky clean movie image, strapped on a leather suit, and rocked the stage in front of a live audience. After years of feeling lost, he glowed with renewed purpose. The show's ratings soared, proving to the world, and maybe even to himself, that the king was far from washed up. This marked a crucial turning point, although Colonel Parker quickly steered him into another commercial arena, a residency in Las Vegas. At first, Vegas was a triumph. Sold-out shows, adoring crowds, and paychecks that soared into seven figures. But it also became a trap. Night after night, Elvis poured himself into performances that demanded superhuman energy. To keep going, he began to rely on prescription pills, uppers to wake up, downers to sleep, and more pills to blunt the anxiety that never quite left him. Close associates noted that he became paranoid, sometimes scolding band members over trivial mistakes. He seemed convinced that no one really understood the weight on his shoulders. Priscilla, feeling neglected and unable to break through his increasingly drug-fueled moods, left him in 1972. That blow deepened his isolation, and he spiraled further into substance dependence. Still, the shows went on, a glittery parade of rhinestones, big ballads, and captive tourists. Audiences saw the magnetic star, the man who could bend a note until it shattered hearts. But in backstage corridors, Elvis often slumped in a chair, exhausted. He'd rally when the curtains rose, but each time it took more energy, more medication. On one occasion, after stumbling through a performance, he reportedly muttered, "I can't keep this up." His final years were a heartbreaking contradiction. The king of rock and roll, beloved by millions, trapped in a cycle of self-destruction. By 1977, Elvis's health had deteriorated to the point where rumors spread about canceled shows and bizarre behavior. Those who dared to speak up about his physical or mental condition were often shut out. Then, on August 16th, he was found unconscious at Graceland. The official cause was a heart attack, likely induced by the array of drugs in his system. He was just 42 years old. In the wake of his passing, the world reeled. News outlets broadcast tearful tributes. Radio stations played marathon Elvis blocks, and fans flocked to Graceland with flowers and candles. Even so, questions lingered. How does someone with so much talent and so much love from the public reach such a tragic end? Some blamed the relentless demands of his manager. Others pointed to his own insecurities and the unlimited access to pills. There was probably truth in every angle, a tangle of forces that no single person could unravel. But despite the sadness, the legacy remains colossal. He influenced generations of musicians, from the Beatles to modern pop stars, who point to him as a turning point in how music could sound and how performers could captivate. He sold over 1 billion records worldwide, a staggering feat for a boy who once stuttered through an amateur singing contest at his high school. Even years after his death, fans keep visiting Graceland, paying homage to the man who changed the cultural temperature of an entire nation. Looking back, it's clear Elvis Presley lived in a world that both adored and consumed him. A place where a poor kid from Mississippi could become a king, but couldn't outrun the ghosts that followed him. His story resonates because it's not just about music. It's about how fame can light a fire that both warms you and burns you alive. In that sense, his life stands as both a triumph and a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when raw talent meets a machine that devours as much as it creates. For all the hits and the history, perhaps the most humanizing detail is that he never stopped longing for the love he'd felt as a child, an all-encompassing affection that might have shielded him from a world too ready to take everything he had to give. If this story resonated with you, feel free to check out the channel. There you'll find more stories where I talk about the challenging life journeys of celebrities.